Okay, well, we put the original gear or ratchet wheel on the bottom there, then the spacer, and I've got a replacement here. It's come from a Type 142, I would say. It's in my spare parts. It's just one of the ones that's loose in the bins, and that looks better than the teeth on this thing, which is just a little bit chewed up looking. But they didn't want to swap from one spot to the other, unfortunately. Now on top of this went this little piece here. And then on top of that went this, which is our Film Advance ratchet part. Now, something interesting about this, the spring here is the wrong shape. That's why it was fixed over a screw, and it should have been fixed to a bracket. There's this bracket here that fits here, and this hole on the end of that bracket, that's where the spring should have extended to. Now I've had a look at this. It's broken off short. So looking closely at the end of this spring here, it's not been cut, because if you cut a spring, you don't cut it along diagonal, you cut it directly across. If you're using a pair of side cutters, you just cut across the wire, not along it. And this shows quite a long break there, and I believe that the original spring broke and someone has shortened it up, and they fixed it back to another spot. So that was the puzzle, because when I was taking this apart, you know, that caught my attention. It was playing on my mind. I couldn't figure out exactly what was supposed to go on there. I couldn't remember. But that's what it was. The spring should have hooked into there, and of course now it doesn't. This piece here, it's got a little ratchet tooth here which drops in and locks into this piece and drives that forward. This piece at the top here, that drives this piece round, which resets the Film Advance for all practical purposes. It resets the shutter. So this is what goes on next. The little tooth on the end of this that engages that ratchet, I'm not 100% certain that that's an ideal shape. I think we can just hope on that score. But this would sit on here like that. Now, I haven't put any lubrication or anything on this yet. I just want to check to see that it functions. It looks like it's going to function correctly. That damaged spring certainly bothers me. It did appear that it was returning the Film Advance without any problems. Well, you can hear that ratchet tooth engaging quite nicely there as it drives the film spool forward, so that's good. I'm looking closely at the angle of the tooth as it engages with that ratchet, and that looks good to me. I don't think that's going to be a problem. So, getting its return spring in position, which should have come all the way back round to this point, and now it doesn't. Where was that? I have in mind that was fixed on a screw at the front here somewhere. I'll have to investigate and look back at my video now, because it's certainly not going to match my pictures of earlier cameras that I've worked on. I did check to see, I was able to go back through my emails and find all references to the Type 122 and then investigate what had happened. And I've actually repaired 5 of these before. 3 singles and 1 pair that I did for one person. This one is by no means the roughest. I'd say it falls midway through the pack. I'm not expecting to run into a brick wall with this. So I'll just do my homework briefly and see where that spring had been hooked to in my earlier videos, because clearly it doesn't go back where it originally would have started. And we'll fix that in place and see if that mechanism moves nicely. I'll be able to put the advanced lever on there probably. Forgot to, press the record button, didn't press it far enough obviously. The spring hooks up here to a screw put in at that point. Now that's a complete foreigner. There is no hole in the body generally with one of these cameras, so that hole was drilled and tapped to suit, and the spring's been hooked up there. Normally the spring would have come right around the back and hooked up over here. So that looks interesting, that looks quite good. So what's happening here? This is not working because it's on the wrong side of that spring. Alright, let me see if I can get that spring correctly positioned. Okay. Alright, trouble at mill. Let me get that spring loose. That may be the problem. Ah. Yes, that is a nuisance. The spring pushes outwards on this little lever. These are lightly cursed even on a good day, because you have 2 springs acting on the centre of this and they interfere with each other. Could that spring go over the outside of that lever? Doubtful. Yeah, one of the coils of the spring here pushes this lever back out of the way. think I need to get more componentry in here to stop this thing from going back as far as it does at the moment. So what other component goes on there? I'm pretty sure it is this piece here, I think. That needs to have a spring on it, and that piece had that unusually long screw. I won't put its spring on there for the moment, but I'll put the screw in place. Now that ratchet just doesn't pull in. And it's not pulling in because of the shape of this large spring. That will explain why the Film Advance seemed to slip or jam. I'm probably going to have to reshape that spring. I don't think it's going to... I doubt that it ever worked well in that position. That probably explains why the wheel was a little bit damaged too. This because the ratchet wasn't pulling neatly into position on it each time. It was shifting. So that's spring. It might not be pulled down tight enough. It's certainly not a good fit. What it's doing is it's fouling this thing, so that this can't drop in neatly. Let's unhook that spring. Yeah, so it's a little bit misshapen. If I can straighten it up a bit, I think we might be in business. That little ratchet drops in nicely when it's not being fouled by that spring. Alright, well, I'll have to study my pictures of the earlier ones I've had apart to get a sense of what the shape that spring was when it was whole. I don't really like the thought of having to make a new one. I'm still thinking about what I'm doing about that main return spring. In the meantime, I put this bracket back on with the spring for that little ratchet pawl there, and that ratchet pawl's job is to prevent the shaft from being able to return backwards unless the rewind is set here, which lifts this little pawl out of contact and would allow the whole wheel to revolve backwards. But that's about as far as I've got at the moment, because I'm still working out what I'm doing about that spring. When the main film advance here returns to its rest position, it lifts the pawl out of contact with the ratchet, which is why when the rewind is set here, lifting the other pawl out of contact with the ratchet, that the film spool can revolve backwards and you can wind the film back into the cassette. If the film advance was further round, the pawl would be engaged, and of course then you wouldn't be able to move that backwards. Alright, well that's doesn't get me much further down the track, because I'm going to have to deal with that spring problem one way or another. But at least it reminds me of the function of the other components. So that screw drop too. So the spring. I have 3 different springs here, all of which were designed to do the same job on completely different cameras. And I've dragged them into the picture to see whether one of those could be adapted to do the task for us. But our problem is quite simple. It's the one that faced the designers, no doubt, with this. Now, our spring has to work around the outside of this diameter. But the complication is that we've also got this pawl here, this lever, sprung-loaded lever, and this sprung-loaded lever have their own return springs, which also bear against the middle of this cylinder. So there is very limited space for anything to happen. And how it was achieved was the 122 was that they had a spring, a coarse spring with very few winds in it, and the tails of the little springs in here had to fall in between these coils in order for things not to foul up with each other. If that sounds a little bit Mickey Mouse, that's because it was. Alright, so what I'll do with this spring in the first instance is basically just true it up a bit. You can see that the coils are anything but even. They don't lie in the same plane. And I'd like to see if I can get this looking more circular in cross section. Where I end up fixing this thing, I've yet to decide. I may have to start all over again. Well, by reshaping that spring, I've got it to the stage where the springs are not interfering with each other and the film advance works as designed. So I'm quite pleased with that. We're using the shortened original spring that they had in the camera with the odd screw in the end there that holds the spring in place rather than having it hooked in here, because the spring is basically just too short to do the job. It means that the advance is probably stiffer. The return on the advance lever is probably stiffer than it would have been originally. But I don't see another easy solution to that, short of possibly moving this screw and drilling a hole in the casting round here instead. But it does work, and it's working smoothly. So I'm prepared to take that as a win, and I will move on and put the other control levers in place over here. While I was busy working on that, I noticed that the little ratchet wheel that I'd put in there, thinking it was a good one, was not good. It's got a very mutilated tooth on it. So that one was certainly no good, and it's fortunate that I had a choice of spares that I could use on that one, and the other one was fine. So I know we've got a control lever at the front here. So that'll probably be my next task, is to get that in place. I can see the post for the spring, the screw goes here, the pivot screw for the lever, and the lever comes across to here. And we have one other, and I don't remember where it goes. I think it goes around here. Oh well, I'll find that out shortly. First I'll just tidy this up. So it's all in place at the moment, but I haven't, I want to lubricate it, and the collar that goes down in here and tightens that up, I want to take the burred edges off that so it's not rubbing on the inside of this drum to the extent that it currently is. I'll put this control lever in place. If I can ever get the screw started. That spring is awkward, to say the least. I'll take the spring off, see if I can I'll get the screw in place and get the spring on afterwards. Looks right. That seems tight. I think that screw, yeah. What happens if screws are over tightened like that? That's a shoulder screw with quite a small shoulder at the end of it. Is that if it's over tightened, it actually bites into the surface of the body, which means that effectively it goes down deeper. And if it goes down deeper, then instead of the lever revolving smoothly around that screw head, you find that it's been held down tight against the body instead. And I can see, looking at that lever and that screw, that there's sufficient clearance there in normal conditions for that to move smoothly. But because the hole that's burrowed into the aluminium there, it means that the screw comes down too tight. So I'm going to have to see if I can put a washer under there and get it to bite on that instead. Well, that appears to have worked. I'm moving the take-up spool with my thumb. As you can see, as that comes around, that arm drops in, and as it drops in, it locks the film advance. That's good. Well, that's that lever. I'll get the other lever in over here, and have a better idea of whether the whole thing's going to move. I'm looking closely at this arm here. This arm on this piece here is designed so that when the film advance hits it, it pulls this around, which disengages this, lifting it all out of position. And that the first movement of this lever is before the ratchet bites. So it's not pulling the film at that stage, the lever simply moves, disengages this, which takes the dog out of that ratchet and allows the film to be advanced. I'll get the other lever in place next, and then we should be in business. And this one goes over here somewhere. Yeah, of course it does. This may be a similar problem. Yeah, the screw is bound to the lever at the moment, which is wrong. The spring might be caught underneath that shoulder. I'll have to have a look at that. Yeah, the shoulder on that screw's damaged. It may be that the lever can't rotate round it properly. Yeah, it's looking quite chewed up there. Let's see if we can get that turning in there. Yeah, that's not good. Just unhook that spring. So this is a bit of a repeated problems with this camera with things that are not quite right. Yeah, that's around the shoulder there now. Yeah, that's rough. So some roughness on this shoulder, and it's not allowing this to revolve around it smoothly. This may be bent too. It doesn't look dead flat, and that will be enough to tighten that hole up so that this won't rotate smoothly. I'll have to see if I can true that up slightly. I don't like doing this because there are no spares. With that lever being bent, it probably meant that the hole was no longer round. Alright, I'll just give that a touch with a file and hope it moves smoothly.